It is likely the biggest topic still yet to be talked about at the Idaho State House. School choice, fund students, not systems, education savings accounts. Well, we at least have a formal introduction to join the conversation because late yesterday afternoon, the dozen lawmakers who call themselves the Freedom Caucus dropped their latest banger, an attempt to add a new chapter to state code, Chapter 66, Title 33, otherwise known as the Freedom in Education Savings Account Act. However, it's not an act yet. It's technically not even a bill and still in the early stages of just a proposal at this point. It hasn't even been brought up in any committee yet. The plan is to create a savings account for families with K through 12 students. So instead of public money going directly to school districts, it, or at least a portion of it, would follow the student to whatever school they choose to attend, private, charter, magnet, or home. So here's how the proposal would work. Every year, a parent would sign up their K through 12 kid for this education savings account, an ESA. Then the Department of Education, instead of sending the money they would send to a school district for that student to attend a school in that district, they would put 80% of that money into an ESA. The district would get the other 20%, which in today's dollars, let's say if the state spends $9,100 per year per student, which is still last in the country, by the way, 80% of that would be about $7,200 per student. Their breakdown, according to the Freedom Caucus, that makes it around $6,000. That number, still debatable. That money would now be available to each family to spend it how they see fit. For private school tuition and textbooks, to buy school supplies for homeschoolers, to pay a tutor for extra help after school, those kind of things, including transportation, including any services provided by a public school, classes, or any extracurricular program. You wouldn't be able to use it for non-educational things like TVs, telephones, video game consoles, those kind of things. But that money would be distributed by the Department of Education through an easy-to-use electronic or online funds transfer service. That is yet to be determined. What would be determined, despite state money, public money, going to non-public schools, there would be no state control over said non-public schools. Private schools would not have to change their creed, their practices, their curriculum, or their admissions policies, meaning they can still turn down anyone for any reason, disabilities included. Nor would there be any supervision over those non-public or home schools, meaning there would be no accountability or state assessment requirements. So those are some of the highlights. And to be fair, this 7-page proposal is just that. It's just a proposal. Again, has not yet been printed as a bill or even introduced into a committee. But when it does, or I should say, if it does, it could look a lot different than this. But knowing what we know now, we wanted to spend a little time on the biggest aspect of school choice and ESAs, the funds following students. However you view school choice, the discussion always revolves around the cash to fund it. And in Idaho, if or how that money flows into private schools. Local education nonprofit Bloom works primarily with Idaho charter schools. Their CEO spoke with Andrew Bartline today to break down this early draft legislation and explain his concerns with the language in it.
School choice, fittingly, has two schools of thought.
For some people, it means that they want the dollars to follow children to any school of their choice, be it private, public, charter. Some go a little more narrowly and they'll say, I support school choice as long as it's only public school choice.
Terry Ryan is the CEO of Idaho education nonprofit Bloom, and he sees a problem with blurring the lines that divide private and public education.
We have a strong Blaine Amendment.
What do you mean when you say Blaine Amendment?
The Blaine Amendment is a prohibition that's been around since the late 1800s on any public dollars going to education in private and specifically religious schools.
The benchmark has declined from.
But the Idaho Freedom Caucus's most recent school choice draft legislation allows just that. The state legislature would set aside nearly $20 million of state money. That comes out to roughly $6,000 a student. Wherever that student chooses to enroll, the $6,000 would fund that same school, meaning any student enrolled in a private school would receive nearly $6,000 annually to subsidize their private school tuition.
Oh, people are concerned that this takes the publicness out of education.
But that's not new. The United States Supreme Court struck down the state of Montana's Blaine Amendment in 2020. The majority opinion held the amendment violated the free exercise of religion.
So you're seeing more energy and efforts directed at encouraging, enabling private school choice, that is public dollars following children to private schools, religious schools, or the such.
Ryan further adds the draft legislation at hand has holes in its logic.
On page 6, line 10, it says, "This chapter does not permit any government agency to exercise control or supervision over any non-public school or homeschooling." It seems a little unique to me that state dollars can go into a private school and there are no strings attached at all.
That's exactly what I'm referencing. And what's interesting and ironic with sort of the side that's pushing this is that they're bashing the public school because of their low test scores, their low graduation rates, and they're saying, well, let's give money to families so their children can opt out, but then we're not going to worry if they're actually learning anything in the school of choice that they go to. So philosophically, I support dollars following students to the schools of their choice. However, I do think there should be some strings attached around the performance for these dollars, and that is not in that legislation. If this legislation is signed into law, the first thing that's going to happen is going to be a lawsuit directed at it. That's what's happened in Kentucky. That's what's happened in West Virginia. I think that's what's going to happen in Iowa. So this will be litigated. And then, so I'll stop there.
Ryan says the Blaine Amendment is still in Idaho's Constitution despite the Supreme Court ruling over Montana's Blaine Amendment and what's happened elsewhere. Ryan works with a lot of charter schools and generally supports the idea of school choice despite his concerns that he sees in this specific draft. And he wanted to clarify as well that he's sort of more in favor of some incremental steps. You look at Arizona, that's kind of the poster child, for the lack of a better term, of what school choice advocates support,
right.
Universal school choice advocates. He said it took him like 20 years to get there.
True.
So just snapping your fingers and trying to get it overnight, that's not how it worked with charter schools and how they've been built up in the state, and he doesn't think that's the best option for school choice in the state either.
I would guess the Freedom Caucus is looking at what works in Arizona and saying, well, let's just cookie cutter that here in Idaho, and it should work instantly, but we'll have to see how it goes. We don't know how many people will be interested in this. Again, this is just a proposal. There could be a lot of changes. One thing I learned today, that accountability thing. I don't know that there's going to be a lot of legislators out there that are in favor of giving money to a school or a private school and saying, yeah, do with it what you will. Teach your students as you see fit, and we have no say in that.
And I'm no legal expert, but yeah, it seems tough to say no strings attached to public dollars. I think a lot of taxpayers are going to say, well, I have thoughts about that myself.
All right, this isn't the last we are going to hear of this. We'll dive deeper into this as we get a little further into legislative session and see what actually gets proposed when that day comes. All right, thank you very much, Andrew.